evening, ladies and gentlemen, and distinguished guests. Welcome to the 26th Annual K.I. Thomas Memorial Oration. Before we begin, may I please request you all to put your phones on the silent mode. Thank you. This year, Mr. N. Ram, Chairman Kasturi and Sons, is the guest orator for the evening. We begin the program with the invocation, the hymn, Count Your Blessings, which will be rendered by the school choir. I now request and invite Dr. Salim Thomas, President of K.I. Thomas Educational Society, on stage to introduce Mr. Ram.
Trustees of the school, members of the Board of Management, distinguished guests, friends and admirers of Kit Thomas, alumni of the Lawrence School, Lovedale, and of Sisha, Principal Omina Thomas and members of the staff, parents, boys and girls. It gives me great pleasure to welcome you all to another Kit Thomas oration. This is a talk once attended, never missed thereafter, Not only is this an opportunity to listen to a brilliant speaker, but also one is able to meet up with old friends and comrades. We had a recent Oration get-together in Chennai. The senior most had joined the school in 1951, predating Kit, who joined in 1952. The love and respect shown for Kit was truly heartwarming. Kit used to teach English language in Lovedale. One day he was reading out the marks on a given homework essay. So-and-so 10 marks, so-and-so 15, etc., etc. One student kept asking, "Sir, out of, sir, out of." Kit turned around, looked him in the eye and said, "Out of pity." Our orator for 2025 is the noted journalist N. Ram. He was born in 1945 and is the great-grandson of S. Kasturi and Sons, the patriarch of the family that owns the Hindu group. He did his schooling in MCC Higher Secondary School, followed by a bachelor's degree from Loyola College in 1964 and a master's from Presidency College 2 years later. This was followed by an MS in Comparative Journalism from the Columbia University Graduate School of Journalism. He was active in student politics, becoming a vice president of the SFI and later a member of the CPM. He began his career in journalism with the Hindu in 1977, working his way up through the ranks, reporting, editing, editorial writing, investigative journalism, and magazine journalism. He did 2 years as an international correspondent in Washington, D.C. He came to fame with the Bofors expose. Despite intense pressure from the Rajiv Gandhi government and from the family, he continued a single-minded pursuit into the arms deal. He later became editor-in-chief of the Hindu. He is today no longer active as a journalist, but is the chairman of the Hindu group and publisher of the Hindu group of publications. He was recently interviewed by Stephen Sacker on the BBC program Hard Talk. The latter called him old-fashioned for sticking to print journalism. While newspapers may be dying in the West from lack of advertising, it is thriving in India. Witness the daily full-page ads in our newspapers. I would describe Mr. N. Ram as a doyen in the field of journalism, keeping it as free of government intervention as possible, enabling younger journalists to use the modern techniques of social media and YouTube. Mr. N. Ram has won a number of awards over the years, which is including a Padma Bhushan from the President of India and a Sri Lanka Ratna from that country, which is the highest civilian award given to non-citizens. What many may not know is that Mr. N. Ram is a distinguished cricketer and still keeps touch with cricket. He played Ranji Trophy cricket for Tamil Nadu. Mr. Ram's daughter Vidya is an alumnus of Shishya and is following in her father's footsteps in making a career in journalism. Mr. Ram was well known to Kit and to Grace Cherian, two of our founders. There has been a mixed response to the topic of today's oration, both for and against. In fact, the last week in the Hindu, there have been a number of op-ed articles, both for and against. However, we as a school are caught between two chairs and trying to juggle the various rules and regulations need some clarification. Mr. Ram is a much sought after speaker, and I will not keep you all waiting anymore. Welcome, Mr. N. Ram, to Shishya.
Good evening, friends, and thank you, Dr. Salim Thomas, President of the Board of Trustees of Sishya Adiyar, Chennai. I'd first like to join in this tribute to Kit Thomas, the teacher and institution builder. Looking at your website on the founder, I read about his vision to build a school that would recognize the latent skill, and I'm quoting here, and potential that drifted into the school gate each morning and mold that endowment into singular global citizens by stimulating their curiosity, nurturing their creativity and leadership, and developing their character. And it points out that the reason that to do this well, you needed to create an educational partnership between an inquiring student and an informed teacher, and one supported by enlightened school stewardship and committed parents. That is a formulation for success. It's got everything, every element that is needed to meet a school that is up to our expectations and beyond. And Kit Thomas was clearly a very distinguished institution builder. He had a vision, he knew about the ways and means, he knew what not to do. And I think when he came to Sishya much later, a totally different proposition from turning Lawrence School, Lovedale, from a British military school into one of the top public schools in India and perhaps in the whole region, at least at that time. And I think very, very important, perhaps he realized it when he came to found Sishya. I don't know his approach to discipline at Lawrence School, Lovedale, but certainly I knew about this time in Sishya, the crucial admonition: do not take away childhood from children, a reference clearly to a heavy-handed system of education in India, where the teacher was essentially a disciplinarian in the draconian sense, not in the sense of inculcating good discipline or values. But Mr. George here senior advocate pays close attention to words, and I'm sure he would appreciate the nuance involved in the use of the word disciplinarian rather than someone who believes in discipline and so on. And Kit Thomas emphasized the creation of an atmosphere in the school that would make students want to come back every day. That's a very elegant way of putting it. Do not take away childhood from children and create an atmosphere in the school that would want them to come back every day. A big ask. Very few schools could achieve that, but that was at least the goal. And as has been mentioned, I've had long associations with the school. My daughter came here. Salim referred to the Bofors investigation, and I cannot forget the fact that because of certain inputs that were made into the intelligence system, for quite a while I drove my daughter to school accompanied by a gunman who the school authorities kindly permitted. They allowed the gunman to be under a tree there. Nothing happened, but that was the atmosphere of those days. And I used to meet Mr. Kit Thomas now and then, and I was struck. I didn't know him from his Lawrence School days, but I certainly knew him here. And he had a very broad approach, secular, democratic, and very modern indeed in his outlook. On the choice of subject, after a brief discussion with Dr. Salim Thomas, we picked on center-state relations and the failure of federalism. Why pick on education? And Salim told me that some members inquired whether it was appropriate to bring in politics into a discussion, to which apparently he responded, it's unavoidable or inescapable. From a non-political standpoint, it should appear naive to a politician The almost rhetorical question is reasonable. The question is, why pick on education? It's reasonable, it's just, and it's ethical. But from a realistic standpoint, whether it is driven by ideology or realpolitik, the question should be inverted. And that question is, I propose, why not pick on education? Because whether you're speaking about the right or the left or the center or the political spectrum, not just in India, but virtually across the world, we see what Trump is doing, President Trump, Donald Trump is doing in the United States, throwing out everything that seeks to be committed to diversity, equality, inclusion, and I'm ashamed to say that many universities, including my own alma mater, Columbia, have caved in to this bullying and threats. But there are one or two exceptions. I'll come to that later. I think it's education in real life gets intensely political. Its content, pedagogic as well as ideological, the values underpinning it, the uses it is put to, and so on. You cannot avoid bringing in politics. Politics intrudes into the sphere. To me, this seems to be an inescapable law, but it doesn't mean that all the political actors are equally responsible for the problem. Problem of center-state relations I've got into, and for the failure of federalism. As someone who has, as a journalist, followed politics over decades, I will not fall into the trap of false equivalence. I want to cite two examples of the importance of education to two ideologically opposed movements. One is the RSS, the Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh, which is now the major force dominating Indian politics through its political party, the BJP, led by Prime Minister Narendra Modi. Education in the RSS vision plays a pivotal role in its program, and also it aligns with the RSS's broader goals of what they call cultural preservation, nation building, and fostering a sense of pride in Indian heritage. And the RSS emphasizes education as a means to instill values, promote Indian ethos, and strengthen societal cohesion in their own view. They talk about character and nation building, cultural and linguistic focus, influence on policies, youth engagement, and so on. And it's not just in words, they put it into practice. And you see the political outcome over the long term. I need not elaborate further on this, except to say that the RSS is deeply committed to the ideology of Hindutva, which Veer Savarkar developed into an ideological system, and to the political project of Hindu Rashtra, the Hindu state, the Hindu polity, and so on. I leave you to make your own assessment of what the RSS is up to and all the organizations it has set up or which are affiliated to it. On the other side, you have the Dravidian movement. And there is a book here which is worth reading, particularly the chapter on democratizing education. Chapter 3 of this book, titled The Dravidian Model, Interpreting the Political Economy of Tamil Nadu, by Professors A. Kalayarasan and M. Vijay Bhaskar, published by Cambridge University Press in 2021, where they basically point out the vital role education has played in this movement, the belief that education is the pathway to mobility as well as social justice. And the authors, Professors Kalayarasan and Vijay Bhaskar, talk about the formation of what they call a Dravidian common sense, which sees modern education as the pathway, not the kind of education the RSS talks about. These are diametrically opposed views, and they make a big difference. Again, it's not just in words, it's in practice. And this book, drawing on data over the long term, seeks to substantiate the thesis that the Dravidian model, which has been largely followed in Tamil Nadu over the last, at least since 1967, probably longer, if you go back to Periyar and earlier, the Justice Party, I think it has made a real difference to social development. Tamil Nadu claims to be the number one ranked state in the country. The India Today's survey called State of the States year after year puts Tamil Nadu right at the top of states in terms of overall performance. Not in every respect, but overall performance. And in the field of education, certainly, Tamil Nadu ranks very high. For example, when you look at the gross enrollment ratio in higher education, Tamil Nadu with 40-odd% is way above the national average. About even major states like Maharashtra and so on, it's the number one state there. And every indicator relating to education, Tamil Nadu ranks very high, if not the top, at least in the top 2 or 3 in this respect. Of course, this has been challenged, among others, by Governor Ravi. Governors have never stayed within the Raj Bhavan historically speaking. There have been good governors and governors who have transgressed the limits of their constitutional office. And in all honesty, I find that the present governor does that all the time. For example, he tried to change the name of the state. He has openly come out and said that Tamil Nadu's performance at the school level, the primary and middle school level, is appalling, that the retention rates are very poor, that students in higher classes can't read or add or subtract and so on. It's very public. So it is right there for people to appreciate or assess whether you agree with it or not. And he also cites some data from Pratham Foundation, ESA data, and the state education minister and other spokespersons for the DMK government spiritedly challenge this, saying they'll carry out their own surveys and so on. All that it means is there are problems out there. There are problems with educational outcomes, no question about it, but how does it compare with the performance of other states? That's the question. There's no room for complacency here, but we have to appreciate the fact that this is a state that has a certain model, that has a vision. However imperfect the implementation of these policies, it has delivered over the long term. That is undeniable. And it's reflected in all the major sectors. For example, if you look at the performance in the manufacturing sector, more than 40% of women in India employed in manufacturing are in Tamil Nadu, more than 40%. A striking statistic, hard for people to believe, more than 40% in one state. I'm talking about manufacturing. And there are other indicators as well. It's not just Tamil Nadu, it's southern states like Kerala, even Andhra Pradesh, Karnataka in some respects, that are far ahead, unfortunately, opening up a gap between two regions of India. It's not unfortunate for them, but unfortunate for those who miss out compared with the Hindi-speaking states, and even compared with states like Gujarat and Maharashtra, and of course West Bengal. So what explains this striking differentiation? What explains this gap in performance? Whether you look at per capita income in these states or any other indicator, I think education has a lot to do with this. The foundations laid over the long term have a lot to do with the present success or relative success in fields. So the question, why pick on education, can be easily answered with reference to both the ideology of the main players and actual practice results in the field, outcomes. However dissatisfied we are with outcomes in rural schools and so on, in Tamil Nadu, in other southern states, in a comparative framework, you can see the performance is very much better, and there is an attempt to improve, which we do not see to the same extent elsewhere. The main areas that have come into dispute, one is the language policy. It goes back to the old language policy of 1986. I was a student at Presidency College when the anti-Hindi agitation broke out. It was called anti-Hindi agitation, and later on it was clarified that people are not opposed to any language. It's against Hindi imposition. This problem goes back to the debates in the Constituent Assembly. There's no doubt about it, where Hindi was given a privileged place. They thought that Hindi would spread all over India and gradually replace English as the linked language. And it never happened. The importance of English has risen over the long period. Hindi has also developed, and there are many fine writings in Hindi, great literature and so on, spoken by tens of millions of people. But has English disappeared? Has the time come to replace English as at least an associate official language? Can Hindi be imposed on non-Hindi speaking states at the basic foundation level? These are questions that have come to the fore. And Tamil Nadu has basically refused to put in practice the three-language formula. It stayed with the two-language formula consistently, emphasizing Tamil and English instead of adopting the new economic policies, that is 2020's policies, a three-language formula. This reflects the state's commitment to safeguarding its linguistic heritage and resisting the perceived imposition of Hindi. There is scope for developing Tamil, putting more educational material out in Tamil. There is scope for learning other languages voluntarily, but to impose a third language, of course, in the 2020 new economic policy document, they make a change and say it need not be Hindi. You study your mother tongue or the language of the state, the home language as it's called. You study English, and you can pick any other language. Where are the teachers to teach languages like Tamil in Uttar Pradesh or Madhya Pradesh, or Telugu or Malayalam or Kannada? Where are the resources? I read that Haryana a long time ago adopted Tamil as a second language and found there are no Tamil speakers at all there. So the three-language formula has not worked in any part of the country, not in one part. They may study Hindi, but is it being taught well? Say in a state like Karnataka or Andhra Pradesh, is it overburdening the school system to do it? These are debatable questions. But for the center to impose this on various states, and particularly non-Hindi speaking states, has become politically contentious, and in the state of Tamil Nadu, completely unacceptable. And we're talking about government schools or government-aided schools here. And even schools like Shishya, I think, do come into the whole policy framework because Tamil is mandated, is compulsory. This, I think, is the big question that's come to the fore now. And with the center's decision, accompanied by hot words in Parliament by the Education Minister, to withhold over 2,000 crore rupees as grants for the Tamil Nadu's Samagra Shiksha scheme, the issue has become extremely disruptive. Why are they doing it? This scheme has been in operation from 2018, and suddenly you say, unless you accept the three-language formula, and they claim it's flexible, because you can take Sanskrit. You can take Sanskrit as a third language. You need not take Hindi, they say. Is Sanskrit a modern language? Is it spoken by anyone other than in one or two villages? To highlight this, it's a great language and great literature. But can you impose Sanskrit as a third language for those who want to avoid Hindi? So as Dr. Parnivel Tyagarajan has pointed out in a recent article published in the Indian Express, this is a surreptitious way to impose Hindi on non-Hindi speaking states, and particularly on the state of Tamil Nadu, and there's no way it will be accepted by the government or people here. So most political parties are aligned with this position. The BJP in this state alone, it's a very minor party, is alone supportive of this. Mr. Annamalai has made it clear, and a signature campaign was started among students for changing for going over to a three-language formula, but I don't think it's going to get anywhere. And this is it has become a major dispute. I think in a real federal system, India claims to be a federation, although some people call it quasi-federal. But in a federal system, states should be given the power, the authority to decide on education. States and individual entities, the regulatory framework should be very light. But for state-run schools or state-aided schools, states should have the regulating authority to lay down the rules of the game in a very light fashion. I don't think it can be heavy-handed. And below the level of states, there should be decentralization. This is the way to go, whether you're talking about the United States till Trump came along, or Australia or Canada, or even the UK, where the educational systems are quite different between England, Scotland, and Wales. Each has its own educational system. And the UK doesn't claim to be a federal system. So there has to be delegation of power and decentralization, even in the field of education. While this is the international trend, which Mr. Trump and the Indian government here are trying to buck, I think there is a strong case for federalism. The Supreme Court in Bommai versus Union of India, which is basically against Article 356 being misused, has held that secularism, federalism, and democracy are part of the unamendable basic features of the Constitution or basic structure of the Constitution. But whether those values are being respected is another matter. So that's where I think the controversy lies. And I would like to make a fervent plea for support for the federal principle. India is too big, too diverse, too pluralistic for anyone to rule by diktat from Delhi. The idea of one nation, one election, one everything, in a country which is multi-ethnic, multi-linguistic, multi-religious, multicultural, multi-political, multi-everything. To seek to do it, I think, is a recipe for disaster, political disaster. And I hope that the union government will back away from this confrontation on the question of language. Or indeed, you have other controversies at different levels on NEET and so on. I won't go into the details of that. But the idea of deciding by diktat from Delhi has to be resisted, in my view, democratically, constitutionally, drawing our inspiration from the freedom struggle and later the struggle to form linguistic states based on the linguistic principle. I think it's very, very important to conserve and protect the linguistic diversity of India. And Tamil Nadu, I think, stands in the forefront of this controversy and this resistance to what is called Hindi imposition, which is really much more than Hindi imposition. So I would like to conclude by saying that the responsibility for poisoning center-state relations, for complicating it, for making it often seem like a mess, and for the failure of federalism in India lies squarely with union governments. And it's not just this government. It goes back to the Congress governments. And in the field of education, the main mischief came during the emergency, 1976. I remember it like yesterday. Bringing education into the concurrent list. There's a state list, there's the union list, and there's a concurrent list where powers are basically distributed. But when there is a conflict between the authority of the state and the union on the particular subject, the iron law is that the union's decision will prevail. And this mischief was done. Some weak attempts were made to change it, bring it back to the state list in the 7th schedule of the Constitution. But no government since then has either had the will or the ability to do what, in a progressive view, would mean bring it back to the state list. The central government, the union government, does have responsibility in funding programs and so on, and in perhaps laying down some standards. But to do what successive governments have done, and particularly this government, overriding the legitimate rights of the governments and peoples of various states, specifically non-Hindi speaking states, I think that the responsibility for the failure of federalism lies in their camp. I hope the resistance to this will bring about a change. I hope federalism could return to, or quasi-federalism could return to a state of cordiality or cooperation. These are difficult things to achieve, but unless that is done, the question is, why pick on education? They'll say, why not pick on education? It's a very emotive subject. It affects everybody, young and old, including grandparents, and there are very strongly committed positions on different sides of the fence. This, I think, these are my submissions on center-state relations and the failure of federalism and the consequences for education. And I hope I've raised some issues, whether you agree with them or not. I think these are relevant issues, perhaps interesting issues, and I'll be happy to take any questions or listen to any comments on this. Dr. Salim Thomas, we had a discussion, and I said I'm quite willing to do that. I think they bring a mic to you, so everyone can hear your question.
question's the following, and you hit upon it at the very end, or rather you touched upon it in the end. And the very experienced IAS officer who mentioned a couple of years ago, he said, Sudhir, what this government has done is in many ways not much different from what the Congress governments have done over the years. But the manner in which they've done it and the strength of, to use his words, evilness with which they have done it is what makes the difference between the two. Now, what is the difference between what the emergency movement, the movement during the emergency to take education to the concurrent list, what was the motive and the intent behind which that was done, and where might it have led compared to what's happening today from a cultural brainwashing? Is there a difference, and what's the difference?
I think there is a difference in kind, because this is a highly ideologically developed or charged movement. I refer to the RSS. They know what they are doing, and it's not what I want for India, or many others perhaps, at least in this state. The reasons behind that amendment in 1976 were not explained. They just simply did it. And because I think they saw this opportunity, for example, in Tamil Nadu, the government was dismissed on allegations of corruption at that time. And the center had a free hand to do whatever, and for some reason, the reasons not explained, they made this change. But what is striking is the failure of successive governments to do anything about it. I can think of a parallel with Sri Lanka. They have a presidential system which clearly has failed. It's got the worst of the French and the parliamentary systems. A lot of people acknowledge that. Every person who contests the presidential office promises to make the presidency a constitutional presidency and hand power back to Parliament, but no president till today does it. Once you get into office, you don't want to let go. That's a parallel that I could think of here. Once you get in, you built up so much power at the center, the Department of Education, Human Resource Development, that you don't want to let go. But the difference is in kind, because these people know what they are doing. They have a clear agenda. The RSS is going to be nearly 100 years old very soon. And they know exactly, and they're willing to wait for in the long term. So, and they have a clear project in education, for education also. So I think once you get into capture the union government, preferably with a majority of your own, that's how they see it, or with allies who have no choice but to go along with, although they are not of your persuasion ideologically, they are not what are called communal or Hindu majoritarianism, or not committed to Hindu majoritarianism. That's the difference. And they do it by exercising executive power against institutions. You see that with Donald Trump. I see a real parallel here. A judge orders something, he flouts that. He declares that he brings in somebody totally against the Constitution, that is spirit of the Constitution, Musk, who sacks a lot of people. They get away with it. Universities have bowed to Trump, barring one or two cases in New York. Because somebody who says they've demonstrated on the Gaza issue, on against war crimes or against the killing of innocent civilians, and you're immediately branded sympathizer of Hamas, and therefore a supporter of terrorism. After 9/11, this business of terrorism has provided an excuse or a reason for many draconian laws, even in so-called Western democracies. And if executive power is pushed against the judiciary, against the election commission. And if you don't abide by what Dr. Ambedkar in the Constituent Assembly debates called constitutional morality, that means a separate discussion, because repeatedly in the discussion, in the debates, and in particularly in the final address to the Constituent Assembly in 1949 November, Dr. Ambedkar sounded a very bleak note, wondering whether India was fit to exercise all that. You had political freedom, you had the right to vote, universal franchise, but you did not have what it takes. And above all, constitutional morality seemed to be missing. And I think it basically comes down, it's a big topic, quite complex, but unless you are guided by the spirit of constitutional morality. In the US, for example, they give the example of George Washington, the first president of the newly independent nation. He completed 2 terms, and nobody was going to stop him from contesting a third, because there's no constitutional amendment at that time that nobody can be elected more than twice for the office of president. But George Washington stepped away and became a farmer. And he then cited what became the framework for at least the American approach to constitutional morality, a certain norm holding things together. If that is missing, you have a problem. The emergency was such a complete misuse of the power under the Constitution. And even the Supreme Court of India could not do anything against it. It had to be a people's revolt, peaceful people's revolt in the election of 1977 that got rid of the emergency, but the mischief was done, at least so far as education was concerned. But today the project is much more elaborate, much more thought through. One after the other of the RSS's promises they're trying to fulfill, whether it's on getting rid of the special status of Kashmir, or the uniform civil code, one nation, one election, population-based delimitation. If there's any interest, we can discuss that as well. It's a whole package of things that are basically, they seek to alter the fundamental character of the Indian Republic, secular, democratic, quasi-federal, or federal. So the answer is, it is a difference in kind. So, are there any comments, questions?
Thank you for a wonderful speech. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay. So
She's got the mic, so after they'll bring it to you next, I think.
You've talked about how hopeless things seem to be right now in terms of center-state relations.
Sorry,
and
say it again.
You've talked about how dire things seem to be
Yeah.
right now in terms of center-state relations.
Yes.
And also about how, rather like the US, there seem to be a lot of parallels with what goes on here.
Yes.
And we don't have a credible opposition as things stand. So since we're speaking in the hallowed grounds of an educational institution, would you say that the youth of tomorrow should look at getting into politics, or should we steer clear, or should they steer clear and leave it to the deal makers and those who are likely to be corrupted? Which is, I mean, what I'm asking is, what advice would you give to the youth of tomorrow?
Thank you. Good question. Yes, I think these are serious concerns. We don't have to exaggerate. I think there's still resistance. After all, in the last Lok Sabha election, the party that sought to win 400 seats, or at least the alliance, fell quite short of a majority. And particularly, this setback was brought about mainly in the Hindi-speaking states, apart from Tamil Nadu and so on, which were basically, you could take it for granted. So on your question, I think whether you like it or not, whether the administrators of educational institutions like it or not, a significant proportion or section of students will get politically educated because they live in the real world, in their homes. Their parents may be political. They are exposed to social media. Some of them are at least exposed to professional media, newspapers, they're on websites or television or digital-only news providers or whatever. A lot of information out there along with a lot of disinformation. So I think it's important to develop what they call media literacy to distinguish what is worthwhile from what is not. But a good section of or proportion of the student bodies in this country at various levels will get informed. Whether they should, I think during the freedom struggle, people gave up their educational careers. I mean, even brilliant students just stopped studying because of the call of Mahatma Gandhi. They went out to participate in the freedom movement, never to come back to finish school or take their degrees from colleges. These are unusual situations. It may happen. It happened in other countries. But I'm not advocating that. I think the principal task of pupils and students is to study and to like to come back the next day, as Kit Thomas would say. The school, don't take, if they're very young, don't take childhood out of children, school children. For older pupils or students, I think the school should be a place where interesting things take place. Informative, educative, and also value forming, inculcating values. So I think if you concentrate on political agitation while you are there, unless the issue is very big, I think your future will take a beating. But to stop students from taking an interest in politics is impossible, and I think it is wrong also. Political education should be part of whatever new education policy comes into being in the future. And the other important thing is freedom of expression, which is also being curbed. It was curbed during the emergency through censorship. There have been episodes even in this state where free speech was sought to be curbed or curtailed. That was the subject of what Dr. Salim Thomas mentioned, the hard talk with Stephen Saka. This includes academic freedom, the freedom on campuses to discuss Gaza in the United States, and here to discuss language policy or delimitation, but in an orderly way, because discipline comes in. You could do it all the time and neglect other subjects, then I think it's no school at all. It's only a political school, which you can have that separately. So I think my view would be a balanced one here. On certain issues, students getting directly involved. That is what the Student Federation of India was all about a long time ago and now, or other student bodies. Typically, school administrators are nervous when anything like that happens because they also feel pressures. If I say something about the governor, they'll think there'll be a call from the Raj Bhavan and so on. But schools should be places where free discussion takes place, uninhibited discussions take place, controversial discussions take place, but well regulated, with all sides being given a chance, nobody being shouted down or trolled, and so on. Those are the rules of the game that should be laid down. Freedom of speech doesn't mean absolute freedom of speech. There are reasonable restrictions provided for in the Constitution. But today, these reasonable restrictions have been converted into unreasonable restrictions, clampdowns, arresting people, detaining them, denying them bail. If they get bail on one case, inflicting another case on them, enforcement directorate and so on. And even students are being affected by this, as well as journalists. So I think maximum freedom of expression with some regulation, sensible regulation. Each school has to work out. The teachers know best what is good, but we want a broad and progressive outlook towards issues of this kind. That's what I would favor. Mr. George wanted to say something.
One question I have.
It's not on.
Hello. Yeah. One question I wish to ask is: do you think it is necessary to have a minimum qualification and education to be a politician? Should there be some mandatory education required? Because to say the Prime Minister of the country is not even educated, or to say that the President doesn't really have any qualifications, how can a country be run by illiterates? Should there be some minimum qualification? Now, for example, what I'm saying is, even if you want to be a clerk in a bank, or any post, there is some minimum educational qualification. Should that be imposed in this country also? That's my question, because I find that especially those holding posts which require expertise, they should at least have some minimum qualification in that field before they stand for that. That's my feeling.
You know, as an experienced lawyer, that this would run foul of the whole principle of universal franchise, and therefore the ability to contest in elections. But I suppose there are age requirements in some cases, so you can see whether legally it's possible, but I think it'll encounter a lot of opposition. And the other problem I see is people will acquire this qualification by means fair or foul. You know so to verify that is going to be a huge task. And I think they've asked about prominent politicians, and the ministry is concerned, or the authority is concerned, treat it like an official secret. Ask whether so, I'm not going to name them, but you know who I'm referring to. Does this person have really have the degree that is claimed in the CVs and so on? Somebody else, can you write to the university and ask, when did this person acquire this degree? Do you have the record? Can you show me this? Can you put the certificate in the public realm? And the answer will be either no answer, or they'll treat it as a state secret. So obviously they'll get around it. The idea behind it is good.
Can I please?
Yes, please.
Yeah.
Hello.
I'm Indra Balan here. I'm Indra Balan.
Yes.
My question relates to the topic itself. Now, the topic has three parts. Part 1 talks of center-state relation. The part 2 talks of the failure of federalism. And the part 3 talks of why pick on education. I was thinking the topic was leading to the last part, but your topic, sir, with due respect, has touched upon all three separately, as I can see. Secondly, Hindu is a paper I really revere to read. And I've been reading this paper for the last 30 years. If I have read any other papers, only to watch page 3. So that's how Hindu is so close to me. But I think today you pitched your topics, I think for students, not for possibly the adult community sitting here. Because I felt your pitching was a little not to the level I expected it to be. I mean, for the kind of what I hold you.
Yeah,
at that
I
level.
take that in good spirit. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. Now, coming to the question, the question I have for you, sir, is the federalism. Which part of federalism you feel is a failure? Point number one, because you've already concluded it's a failure. Second, in the education policy, instead of touching upon why the education to touch upon, you only spoken of language. There is something called the new education policy. So if you could dwell upon, other than language, which other part of the new education policy you feel is leading to federalism failure, we'd be very happy to listen to that. And my third point I want to make is, with Tamil Nadu having possibly the largest Hindi population, migrant population, from all over India. So how do we deal with this migrant population if our children don't learn a third language, it could be Hindi, it could be any other language, to deal with this migrant? Because everywhere I go, every single shop I go today, every single hotel I go today, are all driven by Hindi-speaking crowd or from North Indian crowd. So is it a good idea to not let it have it, should it have it? I mean, your views on this, please.
Yeah, that is an emerging situation, and if this migrant population settles down and they have children here who go to school, then you have to provide for it. But that will not alter the overall picture of the language policy itself. Nobody stops you from learning Hindi. It's just that it's not imposed, and therefore it's not provided for in many government schools or government-aided schools. But nobody stops you from learning it. And you can say that if these migrants are going to settle down, then you would expect them to learn the local language. I know many Hindi-speaking families, Marwari families and so on, who speak much better Tamil than I do. Because they're here. Many Jain families, for example, they're steeped in Tamil culture. So I don't think it's going to be a big deal. But if in the interim period, in the transitional period, these children have to be taken care of, I think some provision has to be made so that they can study in their own language, yes. And the Hindi Prachar Sabha has the southern headquarters here. The Chief Minister has pointed this out, that we are supporting it. But it's an interesting new development, the number of Hindi-speaking migrant families. Also, some of them are Bengali-speaking, I see them. But basically, they have to learn the local language. In the transitional period or in the interim, I think some provision can be made for them. As for the what other areas of education have been affected, I think we need a separate discussion on the new educational policy 2020 and what it takes. I'm not an expert on this, but I think but there are critiques have been provided. There's a large literature on this subject, particularly by those who advocate it, but there are also sharp critiques of this. And perhaps Dr. Salim Thomas knows more about it than I do, because they directly face some of the consequences of this. He was telling me earlier on the requirement of public exams, board exams, at what level?
Class 5 and Class 8.
Class 8 and 9.
5 and 8.
9 and? 5 and 8. Apparently they say it doesn't really matter, then why hold it? My point is the principle of the thing. You may support it or not, but for this to be imposed on a diverse country, a so-called federal system or a quasi-federal system, where, as Dr. Ambedkar said, each is sovereign in its own realm. It's not that the states are subordinate to the center. Only in the concurrent list, the center has overriding powers and certain other features of the Constitution also. But they are supposed to be equal. Each is sovereign in the exercise of its powers. That is the principle involved. That is why we oppose everything being decided in Delhi, whether it is the Congress government or a coalition government or the BJP government. This principle will remain. It should be supported, in my view.
I think that's a...
Hello. Good
Hello.
evening, Mr. Ram. My question, while not specific to education, but has a broader application as far as federal overreach or misuse of powers is concerned. So you were drawing parallels in a comparison with the United States of America. And one of the major differences, while I agree there's huge, abuse or overreach of federal power in both circumstances, the main bulwark against federal overreach and abuse of powers in the US is the court system. And you have organizations like the ACLU, the American Civil Liberties Union, which aggressively tries to protect the constitutional rights of the citizens. Whereas in India, people talk more about political agitation to change these things rather than approaching the courts to get redress for whatever abuses are occurring. Are there organizations, or does it make sense to create organizations that will approach the Supreme Court? Because I've seen a lot of laws, both from the center and the state, which are essentially unconstitutional, but have never been challenged per se.
Yes, there are organizations. For example, the Internet Freedom Foundation, which litigates, which takes up issues and takes them to court, high courts or the Supreme Court, and also provides support, voluntary support to those who are preparing cases. And I myself have been the lead petitioner in a couple of these cases. One of them is against Pegasus, the issue over the use and misuse of military-grade spyware called Pegasus, provided by NSO Group, Israel. And there are indications that this has been used against journalists, against political figures, and we succeeded up to a point where the Supreme Court set up a committee, an expert committee, headed by a former Supreme Court judge, retired Supreme Court judge, to look into it. They submitted a report, which has been kept in a sealed cover. Some of the contents have been leaked or put out even by the Supreme Court, but the issue is still in court. And it's not just a one-man thing. We had a number of people, including very distinguished senior counsel, Kapil Sibal, Manu Singhvi, various others, appearing for these individuals or organizations like the Editors Guild of India on this issue. The other case would be the blocking of the BBC documentary put out by BBC Two, which is not telecast in India, but can be obtained by other means. The government officially blocked this various platforms from making available this documentary. And we went to the Supreme Court. The matter is still pending. Unfortunately, the courts, it takes a very long time here, unlike in the United States, to get these cases processed, and to move forward is very difficult in this. So that is another issue involving free speech, and the right to be informed. You have a right to see this. In practice, more people ended up seeing this documentary, the two parts, than would have been the case had they not blocked it. On various campuses it was shown, and a lot more people ended up seeing it. That's the impression we have. It's called the Streisand effect, that you try to block something and you're not very efficient, more people end up seeing it or get interested in it than would have been the case had you let it go. So there are organizations committed to civil liberties, free speech, and also individuals who take these up to the courts. But unfortunately, only in a minority cases do you get any, what I would call any real justice.
I think we'll have to call it a day there, Mr. Ram. Thank you so much for taking questions and answering them.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for the very engaging, informative, thought and action-provoking talk. We now have the felicitation and presentation of the memento. I request our principal, Mrs. Omna Thomas, and Miss Sandhya Thomas, granddaughter of Mr. Kit Thomas, to do the honors, please. Mrs. Lakshmi Nair will propose the vote of thanks.
Respected Chief Guest, Mr. N. Ram, Trustees, Dr. Salim Thomas, our dear Principal Omna Ma'am, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, it's truly an honor, truly so, to propose the vote of thanks for Shishya's marquee event of the year, the 26th Kit Thomas Memorial Oration 2025. To this illustrious teacher, mentor, and practitioner of journalism, Mr. N. Ram, who hesitates not to speak truth to power, thank you, sir, for giving us a bird's eye view of a burning topic which has direct correlation to the audience in this room. Thank you, sir, for taking precious time out to enlighten us. We would like to place on record our gratitude in advance to Novotel Chennai Chamiers Road for their hospitality and today's dinner. Our heartfelt thanks to Eden for the tea and snacks under a balmy sky. Our very own Jackin Sir and the school choir for the melodious rendering of Count Your Blessings. Thank you. A special word of thanks to Mr. Murthy, Mr. Satish, and our dedicated service staff who work tirelessly time and again to ensure every Shishya event is a success. And a big shout out to an amazing engaged audience which did this year's oration proud. On behalf of Team Shishya, thank you. May I request the audience to please rise for the national anthem.